Hi all, I trust you are all well. I said in the last instalment that we've been looking at this whole idea of adoption from Galatians Chapter 4 and verses 1 to 7. And I said at the last instalment that we would think a little bit about how has this adoption come about? How have we ended up being adopted as God's children into his family? Well, we find the answer to that question in verses 4 and 5 of this chapter that we're looking at. Verse 4 says, "When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons." And in those two verses, we find four things which have brought about this adoption that we enjoy as Christians. We'll perhaps in this instalment just briefly consider the first one of those. It said in those verses, God sent forth his Son. Our adoption has been initiated by God himself. God had a plan to adopt us, and he initiated that plan out of love for us and sent his Son to die for us. In 1 John and chapter 4 and verse 9 we read these words, "In this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins." If we look back in our history to the two world wars of the last century, we know that they were families who sent forth their sons. But as they sent forth their sons to war, to go and fight on the front lines, they were no doubt filled with anxieties and concerns for the welfare of their sons, and also filled with a hope that those sons would come back to them alive. Sadly, we know that for many that wasn't the case, and we're grateful for those who gave their lives to secure our freedom. We find in this pandemic situation that there are also families who are sending forth their loved ones to fight on the front lines of this pandemic, whether that be in hospitals or in other key areas. And I suggest that perhaps those families are sending forth their loved ones, their sons and daughters, their parents, their grandparents, their children, with the same anxieties and the same hopes. Concerns that their children and their loved ones would remain safe and not contract the virus. The hope that they will come back safe and well. And yet when God sent forth his Son, he did it knowing that his Son would die. He did it knowing that his Son would suffer death on a cross for us. But his desire to adopt us into his family was so great that God was willing to send forth his Son. He was willing to initiate this plan of adoption for us. Because of our sin, we had no interest, no desire to be adopted into God's family. But he did, and he took the initiative, and he has loved us and sent forth his Son. So that's the first thing that's involved in our adoption. The love of God initiating a plan of adoption by sending forth his Son to die for us. In the next instalment, we'll look at what else had to happen in order for our adoption to take place. God bless.